Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today we'll be asking how we can support and equip Messianic believers living in the land of Israel. Warm welcome to the programme, and this week's special guest hasn't had too far to travel. He's from South London and his name is Brian Greenaway. Brian, warm welcome to the Middle East Report, and it's great to have you back on the programme.
Thanks, Simon. It's good to be here.
And Brian, can you just share for myself and also for our viewers watching as well, a reminder of how you came to faith in the Lord Jesus Christ?
Sure, yeah. Well, I grew up in a non-religious background, from a Jewish background. And up to the age of 20 or so, I didn't really have much interest in anything spiritual, particularly not Jesus or Christianity or anything like that, because growing up from a Jewish background, you have this sort of prejudice, because it's like the enemy in a certain way. And so I grew up really with a hatred of churches and Christians. And until I got to the age of 20, 21, being a lot of Jewish people are interested in spiritual things. So I began to pursue an interest in things of the spirit, and unfortunately got involved in spiritism and all sorts of things like this, which almost destroyed me at the time. And then two young ladies in my workplace started to talk to me about Jesus, and I gave the stock Jewish reply. Oh, Jesus is nothing to do with the Jews. He's like an Italian import. You know, the Romans brought him in to create a new religion. That's what we're told, and we know, of course, through history, the Christian church has not been good to the Jewish people, and so there's that whole thing of, well, they want to take away our identity, they want to destroy us. But they gave me this book, which some of you may have heard of. It's called Betrayed by Stan Telkin, which is a testimony of a Jewish person who came to faith after trying to do the same thing I was doing, disprove that Jesus had nothing to do with the Jews. And I read the book and I thought, actually, this needs exploring. So at the age of 21, I went to my first church service. I was a bit scared, turned up in a very posh suit, and everybody was really casual there. But then I heard the claims about Jesus or Yeshua upon my life, and I thought, I've been searching for spiritual things for these last couple of years, and this is the genuine article.
Right. Brian, what would you say does it mean to be a complete Jew? Because I fundamentally disagree with Christians saying that Jews need to be converted, because you represent the olive tree, and Gentiles are the branch. They are grafted into the olive tree, and so therefore, there's no such thing as converting Jewish people, because you already have it all anyway. Maybe not recognizing who the Messiah is, but you certainly do. So share with us what this means to you to be a complete Jew. Sure,
yes, yeah, of course, yeah. There's no need to convert. I mean, when I first became a follower of Jesus, I didn't understand much about it. And it's only in the last 15 years I've begun to explore more what that means to me as a Jewish person who believes in Jesus. And yeah, you don't change. It's not a conversion, a change to it. It's actually being faithful to Torah. It's being faithful to the scriptures. They pointed to a Messiah. It's recognizing that Yeshua fulfills the scriptures, all of them. He said, say, the scriptures speak of me, didn't he? All of the scriptures. And so it's recognizing his lordship in that aspect, and then looking back through the scriptures and seeing where he appears. He spoke with Abraham. He spoke with Moses. He was there right through our scripture. So it's just being obedient, really, to what Torah has taught us about looking for the Messiah and accepting that.
And Brian, share with us the unique challenge that you face as a Messianic believer in Yeshua HaMashiach. On the one hand, you are sadly rejected on behalf of mainstream Judaism and the Jewish community, and you don't quite fit in with the church because sadly the Gentile church doesn't have that much understanding of its Jewish roots to its faith. So many churches now are involved in church replacement theology. So it must be a difficult place for you to be in a rock and hard place. Can you explain the challenges that you face that are unique to Jewish people who believe that Yeshua is the Messiah?
Certainly is, yeah. I have lots of conversations as well with other Jewish believers in Jesus. that there is not really a place for us. A friend of mine did once say, can we find a church in the UK? He wanted to sort of say, conduct not an experiment, but say, is there a model of a church that knows how to look after Jewish believers in Jesus? But there isn't, sadly. There are lots of, we appreciate the churches that do understand the purposes of God in Israel, but for actually the Jewish believer to attend a church or a congregation that really understands who they are. And as I said, I've had conversations with Jewish believers who say, well, I can't find anywhere to go. Yeah, there are good examples, but they're so few and far between that, we'd like to work more and help. I don't know if you heard the British Messianic Jewish Alliance that helps Jewish believers in Jesus in the UK, and they do a great work, but we need to do more to support our brothers and sisters in the Lord.
No, absolutely. Well, you're always very, very welcome on the Middle East Port, and I completely understand and support your position, because I know it's not an easy one, but you play a major role in kind of educating Gentile Christians to the Jewish roots of their faith, and also a Hebrew understanding of the Scriptures, I think, is absolutely essential, especially in the days we're living in. But Brian, when you kind of rediscovered, and I think probably rediscovered your Jewish roots and your Jewish heritage, but still believing in the Messiah, that is Yeshua HaMashiach. When did you feel this kind of renewed sense of love for your land and your people, namely the land of Israel?
Yes, well, to me it was a story of orientation. So when I grew up, I was very politically motivated, very political Zionist, you might call it. So I wasn't in a good place. I hated the Arab people, I hated people who were enemies, and as I was growing up to be a teenager, I thought, well, I'm going to volunteer for the IDF and kill our enemies, etc. So when I became a believer, I had to orientate. Yeshua teaches us to love your enemies, and so I went through a journey myself. And about 15 years ago, when I first came into contact with Maoz, whom I now work with, that began me on that journey thinking, right, I need to get some balance back in my life. I need to understand what it means to be a Jewish believer in Jesus, but also I need to address some of those issues, my prejudices that was there. And so now, some of my best friends are Arab people, and I really do. I meet with them regularly and also through the work as well. And so God has orientated and made things different for me now. And that's very important, I think, to see that. So it's a journey, and I'm still learning now. I've been on the road since 1987 when I became a believer. So that's most of my life now. And it is a journey, understanding the balance as well. I think that's very important, is that we cannot go over the top. It's not all about Israel. It's all about what the Lord wants us to do and being obedient to Him. Of course, it's part of my identity of who I am, but actually it's about the balance as well.
Excellent. And Brian, you've got some interesting spiritual thoughts on the passing of our beloved Queen Elizabeth II last month, and how it fits into the Shemitah year. Can you just explain this? Because you sent an email to me, you spoke to me about this on the phone, and I think this is so important because it gives so much insight from a Hebrew perspective on the significance of the Queen's passing away, but also the significance for our nation, Great Britain as well, with a new monarch.
Sure, yes. I mean, there are many who are much more well-versed in these things than me, but you have to step back and observe things in perspective. The thing I noticed was, now beloved Queen, she passed away, and although she'd been Frau, it was a shock for all of us. I remember hearing about it myself. My daughter told me, and I was shocked. The Queen, she's not here anymore. It was a real shock. But then when I reflected upon that, it was, of course, in her 70th year, and of course, many of your listeners will know the significance of number 7 in the Bible. So it was in the 70th year of her reign that she passed away. And then we had the funeral, which had to be held within 10 days because of the Operation London Bridge, the long-term plans they'd had. But the funeral was delayed for a day, for the Monday. And then I actually got the statement from read it from the royal, the statement made by the King, that he wanted 7 days of mourning after the funeral. And that ended, of course, at the end of the year. Rosh Hashanah, of course, many of our listeners will know, the Jewish New Year, the end of the Shemitah year, which is the 7th Jubilee, 1 year every 7 years. So that's a significant year as well. In fact, many economic problems happen in a Shemitah year. We've just had some economic problems at the end of our year. And so there's a pattern there. And so the passing of the Queen and the mourning ended on that particular day. And I think it's very significant. If we look at those patterns, we see God is the engineer of what's happening behind us. Now, I can't say I make great predictions about what that means, but I feel it's a challenge to the church as well, because now the church if I may go on and share what the other thing is, that I noticed during the interment of the Queen, of the late Queen, at the chapel, St George's Chapel, that the crown and the orb and the sceptre, which are the symbols of authority of our monarch, were taken from the coffin by the jeweller and given to the dean of the chapel. Now, I remember seeing an interview with the Queen a couple of years back where the interviewer was talking to her. They were sitting down and the crown was brought out, this same crown that was upon that coffin. And the interviewer neared the crown and she said, "Oh no, you're not allowed to touch it. Only I'm allowed to touch it, or the jeweller with his gloves." And apparently the Archbishop of Canterbury is also allowed to touch it. And yet they took them off from her with the breaking of the staff, the symbolisation of the end of her reign. And they were given to the dean, who took them with his bare hands. And so those offices of state have been handed to the church until we have the coronation of the king. And I think it shows the significance of the church. You know, there isn't just the Church of England, the Pentecostal church, the independent churches. There is the Church of Jesus Christ in the UK. And they hold this authority during this time before the coronation. And I think that's very significant for the church to step up in these days, not to fall back, but to step up and see what authority they have in our nation.
Absolutely. And also it's very interesting to know, and obviously learning with the passing of the Queen and having King Charles as our new king, King Charles III, is that a lot of our monarchy, which is thousands of years old, is actually modelled on the likes of Solomon and David in the Old Testament as well. So it's modelled on Israel's monarchy. And do you think that also has a kind of bearing, but also says something that maybe God hasn't finished with our nation quite yet?
Yes, God's given us responsibility for things in the past, which we've failed on. I mean, many will know about Israel and the situation there, and in a sense the baton was passed. But yeah, there is a responsibility beyond nations. And as you say, our heritage, where we find our Judeo-Christian roots, how we look back through our history, we can say that we definitely have a responsibility there. And it's a responsibility to pray and to step up. It's a long history we have, isn't it, in the UK? And yes, there are some models that we see upon Israel's democracy as well, kingdom as well.
And also, Brian, do you also think that that the church having the crown until King Charles's coronation, which most probably be next spring, also has some sort of relevance? That what can we expect from the King's coronation, and how does this fit into God's plan for our nation at this time?
Well, there's lots of debates, aren't there, about whether they were saying, is he going to be defender of the faith, defender of the faiths? We will just have to wait and see for the coronation about how that rolls out. But it does show the responsibility for the church, I think. Now, there are some, of course, who say they don't like the church-state connection. Some would say that the Church of England should be disestablished, and there are debates about that. I'm not talking about that, I'm just talking about the fact that we do have responsibility. And we have the responsibility as believers to pray for the church, to pray for one another. We cannot not be part of the church. You know, some people say, I don't like the church, I'm not going to go to church anymore, I'm not going to be part of the church. And I think that's sad. I think that we have to recognise that we are part of the body and that there is responsibility within the UK as a nation. We are a unique nation. Brexit has happened. People didn't expect it to happen. We have that independence in a certain sense. We have a new administration in government. We have a new monarch, and we need to step up. I think quite often in the past the church has followed fads. Political or economic situations have happened and the church has jumped on the bandwagon. Whereas when the church of Jesus Christ steps up and takes its authority, then it makes a difference in the nation. We've seen that in our past before.
Absolutely. And Brian, what are your thoughts before we talk about the ministry that is Maoz here representing today? Your thoughts on Liz's Trust consultation to possibly move the British Embassy, where it's located right now in Herzliya, just north of Tel Aviv, to Jerusalem. What do you think spiritually that would mean for our nation if she had the boldness and the courage? Because we know that she's going to be up against huge opposition, particularly within the Foreign Office, to actually move the British Embassy to Jerusalem. So what are your thoughts on spiritually what would happen if she had the courage and the bravery to do that for our nation spiritually?
We're standing with Israel is an important thing, whether you are a church or whether you're a country or a nation. As we know, the scripture has it very clear and the times are short. We're coming back to that time at the end, I'm sure we are. But yeah, I think it's very important. Now, we've already had, it will be one U-turn, but she has made definite commitments to look into it. Let's hope it's not like, we know successive American presidents said, we're looking into it and never did anything about it. This might just be the thing that defines her premiership. How long or how short it is, we don't know, but it might well define her premiership by being strong. And, it will make a difference in our nation. We may not see it straight away. I think people sometimes think that if you do something, things happen straight away, but actually there are seasons in God's plans and purposes. So if she did make that stand, yes, there would be opposition even from her own party, but nonetheless, over time, I think we will see something in our nation of a spiritual renewal.
Amen, and we all want that.
Yes.
And Brian, you're here to represent Maoz. Can you just give us an outline of the ministry? Because I know that your ministry plays a major role in equipping and supporting Messianic believers in the land of Israel, because they don't face the easiest of times in Israel.
No. Well, our ministry has been in Israel for 50 years now, nearly 50 years. Starting with the planting of one congregation, which is still going now, Hebrew-speaking congregation, and growing from there, growing with the land, really. When the ministry was first started, there were maybe 15 Messianic Jews in the land. Now there are 30,000, maybe more. So from planting that first congregation and helping others to plant congregations, helping other believers come to the land, we've grown and developed and seen the growth of the Messianic movement in the land of Israel. And there's some exciting things happening. There are all sorts of work that we're involved in, and one of our primary things is outreach, reaching people with the gospel, whether that's Jew or Arab. That's really what the work we do. So that's our main focus, is outreach.
So let's have a look now at the vision for Maoz Israel.
"45 years ago, two people sat down in the living room just north of Tel Aviv with a dream and a vision. They knew the Bible had promised Israel would be restored to her land, and they were watching it happen before their eyes. But the promises of God don't happen in a vacuum. When Joshua first brought Israel into the land, and when they returned centuries later in the days of Nehemiah, there was work that needed to be done. Maoz Israel was born for just that purpose. In that living room, north of Tel Aviv, Ari and Shira Sorkoram recognized that if Israel was returning to her land, the next promise was right around the corner. The promise to restore Israel to her God and make Israel and her cities a praise among the nations. But again, God's promises don't happen in a vacuum. So the question was, who would be there to build the infrastructure for the growing body of believers, to aid thousands of Jewish families as they upended their lives and moved to Israel, to plant congregations and nourish a community for believers to strengthen each other, to train and raise up Hebrew songwriters, musicians, and worship leaders, to provide printed resources for teaching and discipleship, and to inform the world about it as it all happens. These questions became the basis of the mission Maoz Israel set for itself as it set out to pioneer what is today a young but thriving body of Israeli believers. Now, 45 years later, my husband Kobi and I have picked up the mantle of the vision. Today we have a staff of more than a dozen Israelis. We work with 90 congregations across the country, both Jewish and Arab, and have Maoz branches all over the world. Together, the Maoz Israel team is dedicated to building a strong body of believers in Israel and giving Christians both an insider view into the lives of Israelis and the opportunity to impact those lives in a way that will matter a generation from now.
There you go, that gives you a history and a bit of an overview of the ministry that is Maoz Israel. Brian, I have to say, your ministry that you're involved in has new leadership. So can you tell me something about Shani and Kobi, the new leaders of Maoz? Because obviously your organisation is going through a transition with new leadership.
Sure. I mean, Aaron Shearer, over 40 years, great legacy, it really is. And so the transition of the ministry has been going on for a number of years now. Of course, the lockdown didn't help, as it did with many people across the world, but we knew it was the right time for them to move on. Aaron Shearer now in their 80s, but as strong as ever. So Kobi and Shani bring another fresh vision, a next step really, from a strong base that Aaron Shearer founded and grew the ministry. Now they're taking things in a different direction, but in a sensitive way, still doing all the things that we did before, still centered on outreach and publishing, building up the body, helping believers. That's what it's all about. But they are very gifted. Now Shani is Aaron Shearer's daughter, so there's a good continuity there. And they bring with it a fresh, being younger, of course they bring a fresh Israel-based ministry. And so their heart is really to see young people raised up, whether it be musicians or leaders, etc. They're bringing a fresh vision to our ministry, and it's exciting. We're trying to keep up with them.
That's very good. You're not too old, Brian, don't worry. And there are 4 areas, aren't there, that your ministry focuses on: outreach, publishing, grant making, and also worshipping. Can you just unpack some of these kind of 4 areas of the ministry that you focus on, particularly when it comes to Israel?
Certainly. Well, all our ministry is based in Israel. Everything that we do is there. And outreach, as I said, I mentioned it several times, underpins what we do. So that can be seen in all of the aims and objectives. But more specifically, we're helping local congregations. So we're linked with about 90 congregations in the land in many different ways. So that's mentoring, financial support, helping with resources, and training, so all sorts of things like that. It's about raising up the next generation. In fact, we've got an exciting new congregation we're working with at the moment, which is still in its quite early days, that's growing like anything. It's set to move out of one building into the other. That's quite exciting. On the other side, I think on publishing, that's always been at our heart. Right at the beginning of the ministry, Aaron Shearer recognised that believers needed good resources. And so we've translated over 200 good Christian books into Hebrew. Whether they be children's books, whether they be devotionals or testimonies. And in fact, we've just done a major project with the Israel College of the Bible, and that is what's called the narrated Bible. Modern Hebrew speakers, readers and writers, have trouble accessing ancient Hebrew. It's a bit like us, modern English readers and writers, understanding Shakespeare or Chaucer. And so this project with the Israel College of the Bible helped us to do a chronological Bible with lots of helps in there for people to help them understand Old Testament Hebrew. So that's great. Publishing is fantastic, and we've got lots of books in the pipeline at the moment as well. And the other, of course, is grant making. As you will know, Simon, the cost of living in Israel is probably 40% higher than the UK. And many believers are on the poor end of the spectrum. So we have a grant making fund which helps believers working through local congregations with helping them with everything from getting their teeth fixed to training, to apprenticeships, right up to helping congregations to purchase new buildings, paying rent, buying stuff for congregations. So grant making happens all the time. We have a board that oversees that, and that's important for capacity building believers in the land. And then the last one, of course, is worship. And that's where we're really emphasizing things at the moment. We have a studio in Jerusalem, one of the best studios in the land. And it's not about us, it's about the body. You know, when Nehemiah, you saw on the video, when Nehemiah came back to Israel, and he after he'd been away, he came back and he saw what was happening at the temple. He saw how someone had been lodging there in Nehemiah 13. He saw what was happening and he said, this isn't right. This is not worship. Now we know that Israel leads the world in science, in agriculture, in IT, in all things technical. But when it comes to spiritual things, those of us who have been there will know it's like any other nation. It has its problems, it has its issues. And so we see, and this is our vision, to raise up the Levitical priesthood in the land, to develop worship leaders, develop musicians and artists. So our studio is there for that. And many artists, believers come to the studio, they get training, they get the opportunity to work together, they get a chance to record and publish music. And we want to raise up this generation of the Levitical priesthood to make a sound of the Spirit that comes from the land.
Amazing. And Brian, can you just share, what do you think are the main challenges facing the Messianic community in Israel today? Obviously, there are practical needs, as you mentioned, the high cost of living and just that general help of financial assistance and food and what have you, and clothing. But what is the spiritual challenge facing Messianic believers in Israel today?
Yeah, you're right. They've got the same pressures as many of us have. Economically and socially, and it's not as bad as it was. You know, the challenge before was, hey, these guys are some sort of strange cult. Many Jewish people thought, oh, they're weird people. You know, they're dismissing them, etc. Now that's changing to a certain degree because many, as you know, about 50% of Jewish people in Israel don't even believe in God. They don't have time for anything like that for many reasons. But just now we see the change in attitude that's coming from the average Israeli, because they see believers in the IDF. They see them in the workplace, and they see that they are good people generally, that they serve. They want to work hard. So that's good. But of course our challenge comes from our friends, and we love them in the Orthodox side of the community. You know, they're Jewish people just like us. We love them, we pray for them, we forgive them, but some of them are not very kind to us, you know, in all sorts. So we see that opposition. There are many Jewish believers in Jesus who'd love to come and live in their home country. They'd love to make Aliyah and to live in Israel and to serve in the IDF and to be good citizens. But there is that objection through the immigration laws to those who do believe in Jesus. And for us that's sad, because we love our nation and we love our people and we want to be part of that nation. But there is the objection to that and the barriers to them becoming Israeli citizens.
Absolutely, because I've had them on the program. There are so many young Messianic leaders in Israel that have served and continue to serve in the Israeli Defense Force, the IDF. They continue to put their life on the line to protect the nation and the citizens of Israel. So therefore, surely that should then give you the credentials to say, look, you are more than accepted in Israeli society, because it's a cultural thing, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And within Israeli society, you get your acceptance by serving in the IDF and spending your time in the IDF, and that's where your acceptance comes from. So, for example, can we actually say, and I'm being a bit controversial here now, Brian, but can we actually say that the Messianics are who have served in the IDF are more Israeli than those Orthodox Jews who refused to serve in the IDF and spend time in the Israeli military?
Well, I think, yes, putting your life on the line for your nation is the ultimate test, isn't it?
Absolutely.
As you said, Simon, those have gone from other nations, believers who have served and in some cases given their lives for their nation. I can tell you something anecdotal which illustrates that, if you like. I was once in Jerusalem with a friend of mine, a leader, and we got into a conversation, or he did, in Hebrew with what turned out to be a British Jewish person. And so they were talking, and then he suddenly spoke in English when he realized she was British, and he said to this Jewish person, "Oh, this is my friend Brian. He is, like me, a Messianic Jew." And she exploded. She said, "Oh, you're trying to take away our identity," or all these sort of objections to us being believers in Jesus. So in typical Israeli fashion, he came back at her. He didn't say, "Oh, I'm sorry." He said, "Who do you think you are?" He said, "My daughters have served in the IDF. Have yours? You all live in the UK." He said, "They serve." He said, "They've done their time, my 3 daughters." He said, "How can you say that you are more Jewish than I am? Because we're here, living here. We run to the shelters. We have our children going to the IDF, willingly serving." So that's an anecdotal example, but it is a bigger story, isn't it?
Absolutely. And can you share with us what type of year Maoz had in 2001 with the pandemic, COVID-19 still in place, still horrible lockdowns and everything else, and how Maoz coped and adjusted to the pandemic? Because we know that Israel had one of the most strictest of all the nations when it came to the COVID-19 lockdowns.
Sure. Yeah, it was a tough time for every nation, particularly, well, I wouldn't say particularly, but Israel, it was particularly difficult, as you know. But actually, we had one of our best years in the circumstances, and we knew that God was with us, because we thought to ourselves, we're not going to shut down, we're not going to stop operating, because when that lockdown came in Israel, and it was sudden and it was severe, there wasn't the sort of structure that we saw in the UK, you know, with the finance that was available to businesses and individuals. So we thought to ourselves, right, we've got to help believers where they are. And so we got in contact with believers who we knew had needs, we knew they couldn't work, and we got hold, this is a bit strange, got hold of their bank details in a nice way, and we were able to put money directly from our bank into their bank on a monthly basis for basic needs for food, especially for holiday time as well. And so the bank said to our guys in Israel, you are the only people doing this. No one else is doing this. Exactly. So we were able to raise funds from right across the world, supporting families right across Israel. So we're grateful to God for that. We know that God enabled us, gave us the wisdom, for our partners, who we're so grateful to, because we couldn't have done it without partners giving us the finance to do that. And so it was a great time of being able to just help the body, hold their hand through that time, and to be in contact with them as well by the phone, text, etc., and support and encourage believers. It was a good year in that sense.
Excellent. So let's take a look at how Maoz coped with the year that was 2021, and this is their report.
Israel 2021 began with several months of total lockdown. During this wild ride, here's what Maoz was able to accomplish because of our partners from all over the world who refused to give up on Israel, even no matter how tough it got for them at home.
Just about everything that you know about worship originated in Israel. Worship from Israel has impacted the world for millennia, which is why Maoz has invested so heavily into restoring Israeli worship to its rightful place among our Jewish people and on the world stage. From training for kids to production of original Hebrew and Arabic songs to the First Fruits live concert we filmed during lockdown for an audience of one, the Fellowship of Artists is attracting worshipers from around the country and across continents.
Maoz Israel has translated and published over 160 books over the past 4 decades. This year we completed and released 3 new books, including the narrated Bible in chronological order. In a joint effort with the Israel Bible Society, the only Bible of its kind in Israel took 3.5 years to complete.
We see all the believers in Israel as one body, one team. So we built a network of relationships with over 90 congregations across the land, and through them find and help our weaker brethren. In the past 20 years, I Stand With Israel has dispersed over $8 million, and this year alone has helped hundreds of individuals and families.
For 45 years, Maoz Israel, together with partners around the world, has been making an impact in the land of Israel. If you want to stay informed with insight and stories from Israel, the Maoz Israel Report is here to satisfy, with everything from current events to strategic prayer points to testimonies of changed lives, and to getting you the latest sounds of praise from the land of worship. We hope you'll join hands with us because Israel 2022 is waiting for you.
And so exciting to see that outdoor music studio there, and the centre and the focus on worship. Brian, can you just unpack more? Because I'm very intrigued, and I'd like to know more about this emphasis on music. And we saw there that beautiful open air studio, and encouraging Israeli artists to sing and use their talents. This is a little bit of a new thing isn't it, for Maoz? And what do you think the impact will be on raising up musicians and worship leaders in Israel, and the impact that will have on the Christian community throughout the world?
Sure, yes, yeah. Well, it is a vision that has been given to Kobi and Shani. Over the last several years, they've been thinking about how to make this work. What you saw on the video was an open-air stage at Yad HaShmona, the Messianic kibbutz just outside Jerusalem, where we brought musicians together for our lockdown concert. Of course, no one could come, so we published that. We produced it on CD and video, just to bring in encouragement as an announcement, really, of our what we call the Fellowship of Artists, or Maoz Music. And this vision is, as I mentioned before, to build up the body of worshippers, because we believe every nation has its unique sound. If you remember, what did God say to Pharaoh? He said, "Let my people go," well, through Moses, of course, and Aaron, "let my people go that they may worship me." So it's the primary calling of us as the Jewish people is to bring worship to the Lord. And so we are continuing that vision given to Moses, by God through Moses in that time. And so we've seen through history that the difference that worship can make. Now, Shani, who is our Chief Creative Director, she was, the story behind it is that she was in Brazil once, and she was at a worship conference, and they were singing songs by, I think some were American, maybe there were different songs by Matt Redman or by American artists, and they were singing it in Portuguese. That's fine, there's nothing wrong with that, we sing songs from across the world. But she thought to herself, well, maybe God has a unique sound for each nation, the indigenous people, to be raised up in each nation. So she went back with that vision for Israel. What is our unique sound? What sound has God got for us as Jewish people in Israel? And so, starting in our land, we've begun to do that. We've begun to just make this studio available for worship leaders and artists to come on and write their songs, to be creative together. Because, creative people are different from most people. I'm not particularly creative, and I know being a pastor of a church, creative people can be, but it's that opportunity for them to come together and to work. Now, it's not just about Israel. Because worship started in Israel, what we actually want to do with the studio is to make connections across the world. In Brazil, we have strong connections. In the UK, we're beginning to develop those to help these nations to work with Israel and develop their unique sound of worship. That is what it is. So it's not just, Israel wasn't called for Israel's sake. Israel was called for the nations. And so in the same way, we see that studio. We're not just building that studio for Israel's sake. It's a studio, we believe, that will send the sound of praise across the nations.
That's quite incredible, and this is something new that I've heard today, so I really appreciate that, Brian, as well. But often I find when you go to kind of pro-Israel, say, conferences, and there's a worship band and they start singing Hebrew worship songs, I feel that brings you into the presence of God like no other worship. When Hebrew sung and you actually hear the Hebrew worship songs, there's something very, very special and unique in this. I'd even say that probably Hebrew is the language of God, because he gave it to the Jewish people. And of course they've held on for that and yourselves for over thousands of years, and tied up is the character and the purpose of God. So how special is it to praise and worship God in Hebrew, knowing only over 1.5 centuries ago, Hebrew as a modern language was a dead language. And now over 4 million people, maybe 5 million people speak it in Israel, and over 9 million people around the world, if not more.
Yeah, it's a restoration, isn't it? It's a restoration of what God's original purposes and plans were. The Israeli people, we know the incredible story of how the language has come back to life from not being used at all, apart from religious services. And so we see something prophetic in that, isn't it? There is something prophetic when that tongue is spoken again. And as I say, it's not just for the sake of Israel, it's for the sake of the nations. And, many people who are listening may not speak Hebrew, but they may know a few words. But yeah, we see that as very significant. I think it's a prophetic significance, the restoration of the language and being used in worship. That's the key thing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Not just the language, but being used in worship.
Yeah, Ben Yehuda did a great job.
Yes, he did.
In bringing what was a dead language only used in kind of religious services to the modern people, and of course that is the national language of Israel today. Can you also share with us, which is close to my heart as well, the work that Maoz does with lone soldiers, and it's so important to support the Israeli soldiers belonging to the IDF, particularly those who have come from foreign countries like our own, from Britain or the United States, who have volunteered to serve in the Israeli Defense Force, but they don't have their own Jewish Israeli families to support them.
Yeah, you do see this, and those who visit Israel, and particularly those that live there, will know that there are those who come and serve from nations of the world, and as lone soldiers, and are on their own. And there's a story behind that, where somebody saw this soldier at a bus stop, and he didn't have any family, and it was the Shabbat time, no one to go to. So it's very important to us to recognise those who are serving. And so that when there's a number of projects that we've been involved in supporting to support soldiers. So they range from supporting believers, because as people know, young men have to serve 3 years, young ladies 2 years. And so we have a program to help believers through IDF, which is tough. It's a great organisation. It's a very humanitarian army, but it's tough if you're a believer. And so we support a number of programs to Netivar, pathway, and that is a program to help believers before they go into the military. So that's teenagers through the Chetzim or Arrows program. We've supported that financially. And as they go into the military, to help mentoring and support there as well. But wider than the support for believing IDF serving soldiers is some of the projects. Now, during some of the most recent conflicts, some of our office staff were reservists and they served in the military. And we said to them, what do they need? What do these guys need? They said, well, they're coming back from serving and they're just sitting on the floor. There's nowhere for them to relax, nowhere to, there's a lot of PTSD within the military, and there's nowhere for them to just chill out. So we bought furniture. We got furniture for them, nice comfortable chairs, just places they could relax. And we made it clear that it was Christians from the nations who had purchased this furniture and this place so they could just have a time to chill out.
Excellent. I think we got a couple of pictures to show of these benches. So talk us through that picture there, Brian. So we got some young Israeli soldiers sitting down in what is kind of very Israeli chairs, and the weather's good in Israel. It's not going to rain very much, so they can do that. So talk us through this picture, can you?
Sure. Yeah. Well, that was what they needed. Quite often you present, you think, oh, what do they actually need? Well, this is what they said: just somewhere to sit down. They were very happy. The fact that they're serving, and somebody has said, yeah, we care about your needs. We care about the fact that you just want to chill out, sit down with your friends. There's the other stuff that's been arriving. And we made it clear there's a little plaque on each of them saying that it was given through I Stand With Israel, that it's believers who have paid for these, believers from across the nations. So for us, it was meeting a need that was definitely there.
Amazing. So let's look at the work that Maoz Israel does for Israeli lone soldiers.
My name is Daniel Carlson, and I'm the National Director of CBN Israel. The Army in Israel relies on the family mechanism to support soldiers while they're on leave away from base. If you're here without a family, then there's not a place to go to. Having a home is something that is very necessary in the Army. The challenges to a believer who is a lone soldier is that we're trying to hold a different set of values than the values of the world around us. That entails real practical just behaviors, and when you're in an army and you're trying to walk in a certain way, it adds to the feeling of isolation that you get. This home and being around other believers can be a place where you can come back on weekends, you can really recharge and even spiritually recharge in people that are kind of on the same page as you and know what you're experiencing. In launching the program, we started from scratch. We really had nothing. When you're setting up a home, you need pretty much everything you can think of. I Stand With Israel came alongside us and was helpful in supporting getting simple items, even like setting up the kitchen, getting furniture as well for the home. All these things are absolutely necessary. We wanted this place to feel like home for people. We're so grateful to I Stand With Israel for helping us launch the Lone Soldier Project. We recognize how valuable it is and how much of a blessing it's becoming. Thank you.
And supporting the Israeli soldiers is something very close to my heart, as they do an amazing job in protecting the nation, and they are Israel's warriors on the front line, confronting threats posed by Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, and even Palestinian terror organisations. So my heart goes out to them, and great that you're doing great work in not only providing them with benches but beds as well, and knowing that they're loved and supported. And I just love the guys at the IDF, whether they're in the Army, the Navy or the Air Force. So yeah, special place in my heart for that one, Brian, so I appreciate that. And can you share with us the work that you're doing with young people with Why Israel? Because, sadly there is that challenge to get the message of Israel, God's plans and purposes for Israel and the Jewish people, to the next generation, and to raise up the next generation of leaders to stand with Israel, because this is so important. It's important to God. It's important to where the church is in terms of its influence and its power, is to have that understanding of God's plans and purposes for Israel and to walk in those plans and purposes. So share with us the plans that you've got in helping to equip the next generation of young leaders to know and love Israel and the Jewish people.
Sure, yes. We have to communicate differently to the next generation, don't we?
Absolutely.
I'm in my 50s now, but we recognise at Maoz UK a couple of years ago, we've got to do something about this. We've got to do something about the fact that if you go to your average meeting about Israel, I'm quite young, and you're even younger, Simon. But it's very important for us to reach that generation with the message. And you know, quite often you want to talk about Israel, and people will say, a number of churches or younger people say, "Oh, well, that's too political. It's a strange cultural thing." They will think about that. So we began to pray and ask ourselves, how can we communicate with that next generation? They think differently, they see things differently. So we have a chap called Chip Kendall. Have you heard of him? He's been working with us now for a number of years on that project. He started during lockdown. He's working with us 2 days a week, and he has his own our own website, which is whyisrael.co.uk, and it's an invitation. It's not an imposition. What we're saying to young leaders, to young people, to those young pastors of churches, come and have a conversation with us. Come and join in that conversation about Israel, because we know you're thinking about it. We know that many people have maybe made the decision to put Israel aside, to park the bus, if you like, because they're thinking it's too controversial. I've got to keep the main thing. That's very pastor speak. And I don't want to get caught up in something that's controversial. But, you know, you cannot ignore Israel in the Bible. You cannot ignore the promises. And we find that many young people and many leaders do want to have that conversation. So we are creating an environment where they can come and talk to us, where we can come and speak with them. And in particular, we're working with a young couple called Tom and Melissa Pollard, who went and worked in Sukkot Hallel Prayer House for 3 months, just after they were married. And they got a real revelation of Israel. So through our Watchman Tour, which is a tour that goes to local churches, they bring song, testimony, and their story of how they, as 20-year-olds, came into this revelation and understanding of Israel, which is very balanced, very biblical, and very relevant to the next generation.
Amazing. I have to get them on the programme. That would be good. And finally, topic of discussion is the forthcoming Israeli election, Brian, that takes place on the 1st of November. And this is Israel's 5th election within 2 years. What can we expect?
Yes, what can we expect, Simon? We're less than a month away now, and we'll be in Israel from the 6th of November. So we'll be seeing the, dare I say, fallout from that. So Mr. Netanyahu is still in the background, more than the background now. He's coming back into the fore now, isn't he? And I think that in a certain sense, our current premier thinks that possibly his days are numbered as well through some of the things that he's been saying about the two-state solution, etc. We don't know. You know, we'll keep praying for a stable government. We can keep reading the press and seeing that certain parties will not align. And even now, I think the latest opinion poll shows that there will again be one small party that will hold the balance in the coalition. So again, I think we're going to see just one seat. You never know, maybe two, a two-seat majority coalition, which again will be unstable. And I think the message really for the Israeli people is they need to look to the Lord.
Amen. So let's have a look at this excellent CBN news report that looks at the Likud primaries as Israel goes into another general election for the 1st of November. This is the 5th general election in 2 years.
Welcome to Israeli democracy. This is the Likud primary, almost like a carnival atmosphere, where a number of candidates are running for 25 spots on the Likud list for this upcoming election on November 1st. More than 36 political parties like the Likud either hold primary elections to determine the list of candidates, elect candidates through their institutions, or appoint them through the party leadership. When the list is chosen, those candidates will qualify for the Knesset based on the number of seats the party wins in the election. For example, if a party wins 7 seats, the first 7 people on its list get those seats. CBN News talked with Jerusalem's Deputy Mayor Flor Hassan Nahum and a candidate vying for a spot on the Likud list about the importance of November's election.
Unfortunately, we're getting attacked left and right. As you know, countries adopting BDS legislation, countries who are adopting a narrative that has got nothing to do with the reality here against Israel.
The stakes are enormous, including the Israeli-Palestinian issue, terrorism threats on each border, the future of the Abraham Accords, and at the top of the list, a nuclear Iran. Despite these pressing issues, Hassan Nahum explained why Israel has had so many elections in the past several years and what caused the most recent coalition government to fail.
We have a system which is all about pro-Netanyahu, anti-Netanyahu, people who should be in Netanyahu's camp because they're right-wing, they have almost the same opinions about almost everything, but for personal reasons, they are anti-Netanyahu. And so in the last year, we had this crazy puzzle of a government where nobody could move, nobody could say anything, nobody could do anything, because everything would offend the other people that they were sitting with.
Many hope Israel's next election brings stability, and although its politics can appear uniquely chaotic, Hassan Nahum says Israel and the U.S. share a common political bond.
If anybody has any doubt that Israel is a lively, dynamic democracy, you just have to look at the images today, and they'll know that Israel is an island in the sea. It's a democratic island, like America, same values, in a very different sea over here.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the Likud primary, Jerusalem.
And there's no doubt about it that Israel is a very dynamic democracy, so we need to be praying that God's will be done on November the 1st as the Israelis go to the polls. Down to the last few minutes of the programme, and I've really enjoyed interviewing you today, Brian. It's been great, and also just exploring some of the great work that Maoz is doing for believers in Israel. How can our viewers watching today's programme that have been inspired by what you've said get involved and help to support and equip believers in Israel?
Okay, well, first of all, connected to our website, which I know has been on the screen. We also have which is the UK one, maozisrael.uk. You can visit that website, see what we're doing, what we're up to. Also our whyisrael.co.uk website, that's our young leaders. And what we would suggest to people is make a connection to our website, get in contact with us, and we have a monthly magazine, and that could be posted to people once a month, or they can sign up via the website and receive the report broken down over the month. We also have a prayer letter that goes out every Tuesday, written by Shani in Jerusalem, and it's really gathering ground. It informs you about Israel, it tells you what's happening, draws you into prayer, and tells you about our project so you can support the work in Israel.
Absolutely, and it's important, isn't it, that the church understands God's plans and purposes for Israel, because we are living in biblical times, and the focal point of what God is doing throughout the nations is in Israel. We are seeing the fulfillment of biblical prophecy before our eyes. We haven't even discussed your ministry and what it's doing to help Jewish people from the Ukraine and Russia make Aliyah in fulfillment of biblical prophecy, and to think that over 33,000 Jewish people from the Ukraine, Belarus and Russia have made Aliyah since the Russian invasion of the Ukraine back in February. So it's imperative, isn't it, that the church understand not only its Jewish roots, but its responsibility to help and equip believers in the land of Israel.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, absolutely right, isn't it? Yeah, it's a big story, but there's much that we can do, and we have a responsibility towards Israel as well.
Absolutely, and I know, Brian, you said before the programme that you're hoping to go out and visit Israel next month. What are you expecting when you're back in the land? And for many of us, it's been far too long, particularly for me, since I've walked those beautiful streets in Jerusalem and seen those beautiful olive trees next to the old city in Jerusalem, and especially when it's night, when it's all lit up. And there's nothing more spectacular than seeing the old city in Jerusalem just lit up in the night sky.
Yeah, we're looking forward to going home. That's what I think of it. It's 2.5 years now since we've been there, and we're missing it very much so. So my wife and I will be going there just after the election, and just looking forward to walking the streets and obviously meeting friends, meeting up with our guys there and the team, but we just can't wait to get back.
Excellent. And how should our viewers be praying for Israel at this time? We know that Israel faces uncertainty with the election coming up on the 1st of November, so that's a major priority. But how else should our viewers be praying for Israel at this time?
Yes, I think the Iran situation is the biggest one. I think many viewers will know that. There's something that's got to happen. with the midterm elections in America, it's stopping Biden making decisive action. He doesn't want to do something unpopular. It needs to happen.
Brian, thank you so much for being this week's special guest. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. And I want to thank you for watching this edition of the Middle East Report. And I think it's imperative that not only do we stand with Messianic believers in Israel, but we support them, we equip them, because it's so important that the church stands with our Jewish brothers and sisters living in the land of Israel and helps them. So I want to thank you for watching this edition of the Middle East Report.